Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for subscribing and supporting me, and I love you. Today is episode or chapter or session 2 of the Sexual Sovereignty series, where we learn about. Sorry, I'm dropping shit. Oh, maybe I'm not supposed to be holding it. Where we learn about what sexual sovereignty is, which we talked about at length in the first session, and how to cultivate more sexual sovereignty in your life. So I do want to acknowledge that the subject of sexual sovereignty is pretty nebulous. We don't have a lot of vocabulary or examples of pure sexual sovereignty, in our culture. A lot of times we do have to go into the past. So as I expound on cultivating sexual sovereignty, I will be continuing to define and explain what it is. So if you feel like you really didn't get it the first go round, or the flavor wasn't really for you, or you're still a little confused, don't worry about it. Intuition is also going to be guiding you. Downloads are going to be coming to you. As soon as you start doing this work, the universe responds. And that's true for all magical work, including this kind of stuff. Today, we're going to talk about self-pleasure, and I'm going to give you a little practice that is going to help you begin your journey in cultivating sexual sovereignty, as well as understanding it. Some of this stuff is about learning and knowing, and some of this stuff is about doing and experiencing. And that's true in life and in magic and in the universe and everything. So I'm excited to go on this journey with you. A little bit about self-pleasure. Here's what I want to say. Not everyone has a very positive relationship with pleasure. That's cool. I get it. Our worlds, or I'll speak from my perspective, from what I see and what I feel in this moment as I'm about to talk about self-pleasure, is it doesn't really celebrate us taking time. I mean, now we have self-care culture, quote unquote, but generally our culture does not celebrate taking time to give ourselves the gift of feeling good. And we see that in a lot of things. We see that in the way we talk about food, in the way we talk about love and relationships. Even in the way that we talk about self-care, we sometimes see it in the context of like recovery, or, because everything is so whatever, we have to do this. When really doing this is part of the human experience. We are entitled to plenty of pleasure. And in order to make peace with that, we do have to change our mind a little about what we want our life to look like. So some of us, this was a huge part of my story when I started this work, some of us negate pleasure as a way of experiencing reality, because it affirms that we are hard workers. It affirms that we are self-sacrificing. It affirms that we are taking care of business. We're taking care of our family. We're taking care of, we're in this reality, and this reality is hard. And so we're continuing to affirm those cycles. And what this kind of work invites us to do when we're talking about sex magic and pleasure magic, it invites us to realize that part of the human experience is reconciling the fact that we have a lot of hard work to do in the third dimension, and we get to experience, all of the sensations that come with that, including pleasure. If we didn't want to experience any pleasure, we would have stayed in heaven, or in the collective consciousness, or in the underworld, or wherever you think we come from. When we're in that unified state outside of this reality, we can empathize, the other side of the veil can really empathize with what pleasure is. But in order to experience pleasure, we really do have to come here and be human. There's a lot of things that entities can experience on the other side that are very similar, like joy and compersion. So that's really sweet to know. But here we get physical, pleasurable sensations, and that's a really exciting part about being human. And your soul really elates in you feeling good. It's something that, if you have a hard life and you are working hard and you are in survival mode a lot of the time, it is even more joyful for your soul to get a reprieve from whatever you're thinking and feeling, your soul is reading that and trying to experience that with you, and not trying, succeeding. And so yeah, it gets tired of not feeling pleasure. The other thing is, pleasure does not come from external sources. That's another thing that our culture has told us, is that in order to experience pleasure, there's all of these hoops that we have to jump through, or hurdles that we have to hop over. Our checklists have to be done. This is something I've been cultivating like in the past few months that has really upped my practice by a lot, which is just feeling pleasure in any way I can, not even in a sexual context, by stretching, like all the time. Like when I reach for a glass, I'll just like extend a little bit and give myself a little bit of an extra stretch. And I'm doing this often throughout the day, and some days I forget, but what it reminds me of is that there is a lot of pleasure being in this body. And then before we move on specifically to masturbation, I want to name this. There are plenty of people in this world right now that are experiencing things like chronic illness. They're differently abled. They might have different relationships with pleasure and sex and sexual sensation. And the reason that I name this is because this work does not exclude people that cannot feel pleasure or masturbate in the same way that, we have this kind of normative perception of what masturbation and pleasure look like. And so for those of us that have obstacles to that are, a part of our lives or a part of our being, we can, instead of following the normative routine of what is expected in, like, essentially it's like when people watch porn and they think that's what sex is, there's kind of this story about what pleasure is and what masturbation is. And for those of us that don't fit into, these kind of, oppressive and limiting barriers, which part of working on sexual sovereignty is opening up those barriers. So I invite people to imagine. Imagination is one of the most powerful tools of magic. And for those of us that don't have the exact same mechanism for translating pleasure and sexual activity, it can be very useful to start with your imagination and then filter what you're imagining into your human experience. So, for example, like if I'm saying touch your clitoris, and touching your clitoris doesn't do anything for you, then instead you can imagine that pleasure and find where on or in your body or in your soul or in your spirit that kind of thing would feel good, right? So part of my work is doing guided masturbations, which is something that I've done for groups and for individuals. And in those, I'll say things like genitals, between your legs, I'll say things like going over your arms or your legs, going over through your hair, stuff like that. And what I really invite people to do as a part of cultivating and practicing sexual sovereignty is to acknowledge that there is a wide spectrum of what a body is and what a body does. And to experience the full spectrum of pleasure, we are invited to acknowledge that it's gonna look different for everyone. That's another thing that makes this work kind of nebulous, is that in addition to not having a lot of really positive examples in our culture of positive pleasure, we also don't have a huge library to pull on for what the true reality of pleasure is for people, because we are shown this image of sexuality and pleasure that doesn't resonate with most of us, and especially excludes and limits participation in that kind of practice for people that are differently abled or have a different experience with pleasure, sensation, and, feelings like that. So, just be in communication with your higher self about it. Be in communication with the energies that you work with about it, because the solutions to those things and the path for you does exist. It is just something that it's kind of like you're trailblazing a little. Just by doing this work, you are healing a lot of things for yourself. And one of the burdens of that is having to navigate it in the way that you have to navigate it. And it would serve a lot of us that are able-bodied and do experience sensation and pleasure in the traditional normative illustrated way that we see in porn and TV and media and books. It would serve us to understand that we can also receive information, see how it feels in our imagination and how we want it to feel, and then bring that information wherever in our body or in our soul or in our experience that it goes. Because it doesn't go in the same place for every person, and it doesn't feel the same way for every body. That's part of the human experience. That's why we have different bodies instead of one big body. Okay, so now let's talk about masturbation, now that we've said that. So masturbation, there's a way that masturbation is talked about online when we're talking about manifestation spells. So if you look at like cracked.com or, you know, whatever like online internet content writing mill is creating all of this content, you'll see some clickbait that's like, use your orgasm to blank or masturbate to blank. And the way that they talk about sex magic and sex spells is often around the practice of masturbation, using pleasure and using orgasm. I think that's pretty cool. I don't mind that at all, but I do believe that it deserves a little bit more attention because the orgasm itself and the masturbation itself is not necessarily the spell in itself until you bring into it your intention and you bring into it your participation. So we're going to be doing some sex spells as we go through the series. And as we go through this series and we're doing all of these new sex spells, it will serve us to have a foundational relationship with our sexual pleasure and what masturbation feels and looks like for us. So how do we do that? This is the practice. This is the spell, is creating a sacred space for you to touch yourself in a way that feels good. And if you want to reach orgasm, you can. So for those of us that lack a little bit of privacy, this is a secret that I learned from Usha Rose, who has a beautiful website and does a lot of amazing pleasure work. She put in this email that she was sending out for her self-pleasure event. If you don't have a lot of privacy, put some blankets and pillows in your bathtub. Lock the door. Well, this is my part. The bathtub part was her, but this is what I'm imagining is like lock the door, turn on some music, and now you're in the bathroom with a locked door, right? For as long as, you know, a very long shower would take. And this is one way for you to cultivate a sacred space. That's like on one side of the spectrum. And then for some of us, we have a whole house or apartment or bed to ourselves and we don't even have to worry about it. So the important thing to remember is your sacred space is going to look different, and it can have whatever feels good to you. So when I'm setting up my sacred space, I get my sweet fluffy pillows, I put on some lingerie that I light some candles, I put on some like binaural beats or meditation music, or I have a playlist for spell work that I sometimes put on. And so in this first, experience with yourself, this is an introductory masturbation session that will introduce you, who's experiencing this world, who is the go-between for the spirit and your experience on earth. You will meet your sexually sovereign self, the fully manifested sexually sovereign self that lives inside of you. And as you are pleasuring yourself, if you want to, focus on the fact that there is a sexually sovereign version of you that does exist, it is begging to break free from you. And the way that you get it out is by feeling really, really good and not feeling guilty about it, taking your time. You can also stretch out the time so that you lengthen the masturbation before you orgasm, if you're trying to reach orgasm, or if you want to. If you don't want to, you don't have to. And what I imagine for this looks different for everyone, but this is what I imagine, if I'm prescribing a sex spell to meet your sexually sovereign self and integrate that self into your being, which, that's a very powerful and profound thing to do for yourself. And it might change your life a little bit, so proceed with caution. Spend time, maybe 5 to 10 to 15 or 20 minutes, depending on how much time you're able to give yourself to do this, touching yourself in a way that is not primarily what you would consider sexual. So some things that I like to do is I'll touch myself a little and get like aroused. I'll get my body activated. So that's what I recommend, is activate your pleasure body by rubbing, it could be your genitals, it could be your chest, it could be your nipples, any area that turns you on and gets you activated. You could also like watch or read something that gets you to that place. And then land into your body and feel what it feels like while you're not touching anything, to just experience that activated pleasure. And what you will notice sometimes is that by noticing the pleasure, you increase it. It's an exponential increase. And you can continue to touch yourself in the way that you touched yourself to activate yourself. But what I like to do is, for a while, just give myself a massage with coconut oil and rub my body. And this is an act of self-care that is kind of like foreplay with my sexually sovereign self, like getting myself in the mood and treating my body really well, letting my hands go where it feels good to go, listening to my body. And so during this spell, you're really not under any obligation or any requirements to like manifest something during your orgasm, or, open a portal, or, fantasize about something that you want to attract into your life. This is really landing, this first practice is really just landing into your sexually sovereign self and overcoming anything that doesn't feel amazing about giving yourself the gift of self-pleasure. The first couple, I'll say probably like the first 6 months to a year of me just like playing around with sex magic, I would have breakdowns after I orgasmed during masturbation. And it didn't even have to be during a spell. What I realized now was that when I was giving myself the space to be 100% in my body during pleasure, during self-pleasure, and giving myself the gift of self-pleasure, I was inviting the things that blocked me from that to heal. So what you might find is that you get a little stimulated or triggered about it. You may have to stop and take breaks. You're welcome to keep a journal next to you while you do the practice of masturbation in case you get any downloads or something comes up for you and you want to write it down. And then afterward, you might give yourself some decompression time to drink some water, think about how it felt for you, cry if you need to. I know some of us know the stereotype of like someone that cries after sex. That can happen with ourselves too. And the reason is because there is an overwhelming amount of pleasure and unconditional love coming from source. So, we'll talk more about kind of like the dynamics of sex magic and what we're doing when we do spell work and how we're connecting to source and to self. But really, because we are so early in it, I don't feel like bombarding you with that information is as useful as inviting you to understand what it feels like for you to create a sacred space, masturbate in that space, and see how it feels for you, and see if it does awaken or excite or inspire any senses of divinity or like divine pleasure and divine sexuality. So that feels good and complete. I'll put a text version of all of that in the description. And I want to hear how it goes for you so that as we continue our journey in this series, I can also customize the content to the things that you're experiencing and help you find solutions and find paths and understand what's happening to you. I'm sending lots of love.